Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this solo video, when a 911 call was placed on August 2nd, 2006 at around 11:50 p.m, it would begin one of the most baffling, disturbing, and controversial murder mysteries of all time. That sounds kind of like a bit of a exaggeration, but literally just Google most disturbing unsolved mysteries. This will always be somewhere on that list. This is the story of who murdered Robert Wone. And on the surface it seems pretty straightforward. Jesus, already solved this one. Then you dig a little deeper and it gets trippy and baffling pretty quickly. Where are my cards? Because yeah, it's another one of them rabbit holes. We're going to look at the victim, Robert Wone himself, the investigation, the suspects, the interviews.
He didn't just die, he was murdered. You certainly do know. I do not. You do know.
And everything that happened after. And then of course we gotta talk about some theories, because this case, I don't think any theory really makes sense. By the way, I also have to mention and give a huge shout out to the website whomurderedrobertwone.com. It's a website that's been active for well over a decade now, keeping this case alive. It was set up by Craig Brownstein, David Greer, Michael Kremen, and Doug Johnson. Craig Brownstein also has the full interrogations of the 3 defendants on his YouTube channel, Craig in DC, youtube.com/Craig Brownstein. Go check them out. Shout out to those guys. They didn't know Robert personally or anybody involved in this case personally. They just lived in the area and were fascinated by this case. And who could blame them? This case is fascinating, scary, and disturbing. Now, so as I said last time, grab a beer. Grab a cup of coffee, grab whatever you're doing, settle in. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's give it a go. So the disturbing, because yeah, when you get into it, yikes, case of what happened to Robert Wone. Well, you gotta begin with the lad himself, right? The who, what, why, where, when, why, something. Other words. Well, Robert Wone, he was a very interesting guy in his own right. He was very successful. He seemed like a very happy fella. He was a nice, quiet guy, and he made friends with some interesting people. Now, Robert worked in law, very hard-working guy, a job with a lot of stress, but that was something he really seemed to take, in his stride. Robert Eric Wone was born in the year 1974, if you can believe that, June 1st, in New York City. It's a variation of fruit, I always forget which one. His parents, William and Amy, were third-generation Chinese Americans, and this was something Robert took a lot of pride in. He grew up in Chinatown, Manhattan, and then later went to a private Catholic school in Brooklyn. Now, during his formative years, he would write essays about what does it mean? What does it mean to be Asian American in this day and age? That was something that really meant a lot to him. What does it mean to be Asian American in these days? I don't know, ask an Asian American. So then after graduating high school, he upped sticks and left the big smoke. He went down to Virginia and he enrolled at the prestigious College of William and Mary. There he was studying public policy. As you can probably kind of see with Robert already so far, public policy, civil rights, all that kind of stuff was something Robert took very seriously. He would be the kind of guy who would be out there marching, protesting, all that kind of stuff for civil liberties. He would study public policy and then go on to work in law. He was a stand-up guy who wouldn't just sit back and let things happen in the world around him. He was active in college with various clubs and groups, frats, and when he graduated in 1996, he received the prestigious Algernon Sidney Sullivan Award, named after, let me just check. Yep, Algernon Sullivan, who I have no idea who he is, but he's some kind of lawyer. And it was while he was studying at the College of William and Mary that Robert became really good friends with a guy named Joseph Price. Now, Joseph Price will come up later in this story, big time. But they were both members of this secretive group called 13. And it wasn't like one of these, secret societies with skulls and bones and shit. It was more like the secret society where you just do nice things to people. Anonymous donations, anonymous gifts. Joseph Price, he was also interested in studying law, and so they became best buddies. Unfortunately for Robert Wone, but we will get to that. He later went on to the University of Pennsylvania to study law, and just like he was in the College of William and Mary, very active in student government, clubs, groups, all of that sort of thing. He was also the editor of the school's law journal, and then once he graduated, he passed the state bar exam in New York City, and then he went to work as a clerk for a federal judge in Eastern Virginia. He was getting the old resume, up to scratch before he went to work for a private firm. That was Covington and Burling in Washington, DC. And so if you know kind of anything about this case, you'll know that this is now setting the scene for the nightmare that is to come. So from what I can gather, I know nothing about law and even less about law firms. Covington, though, and Burling in DC seems like a pretty prestigious law firm. They get offices around the world. They were set up in 1919, and it's one of the good ones to join. And Robert, as soon as he joined, he was making his mark. A great place to get your foot in the door, especially for somebody like Robert Wone. They focus on public policy, like perfect for Robert, who had studied that in school. They don't do like criminal law or that sort of thing. They deal more with like regulations, employment law, or real estate law. And so working away like he was, hotshot young fella. It was 2 years into his career, in 2002, that he went to attend a conference in Chicago, Illinois. And it was at that conference he would meet his future wife, Catherine Yu. She also worked in law and was based in Chicago. They began a long-distance relationship, let me tell you, nothing worse. And then they actually married a year later, a year after they met in June 2003, which is a very short time for them to get married. Like, they had known each other for probably like less than a year at this point, but I guess when you know, you know. So to sum up to the night of, Robert, he was married. He worked for a very prestigious firm, so he had a great job, probably very well compensated for it, and his employers knew it. Not only was he likely one of their brightest stars when it came to his day job, outside of all of that, he was on the Asian Pacific American Bar Association Education Fund. He was an advisor for the Museum of the Chinese in the Americas. He was on the board of the William and Mary's Washington, D.C. Council. He was basically, and if there was an acronym that was, you know, something, he was probably on it. It was in June 2006 that he left his job at Covington and Burling and went to work at Radio Free Asia, which is a non-profit, radio news service that broadcasts a lot in Asia, and it's headquartered in Washington, D.C. He was going to work for them as general counsel for, law stuff, you know yourself. So all of that sets us up for the night of August 2nd, 2006. Robert, that evening, he was working late. Now, he hadn't been working in his new job at Radio Free Asia for very long, and he actually wanted to work late and stay on a little bit later that evening because he hadn't met the night shift folk yet. So he wanted to stay on, introduce himself to them, chat away with them, and all that sort of thing. And because he was working late, he didn't want to have to go home to his wife, Catherine Yu. It would mean getting the subway quite a distance. She would be up early for work the next morning, so he didn't want to arrive late and disturb her. So he was like, I'm going to crash with a friend who lives in the city. Now, this wasn't like a spur-of-the-moment thing. He'd been planning this for like about a week in advance, that he was going to stay late this day. So he was going to stay at a friend's who lived less than a 10-minute drive away from the offices of Radio Free Asia. Now, that friend was Joseph Price, who you might remember was a good friend Robert Wone made while he was studying back at college. Old buddy from William and Mary, and they'd become very close. They'd remained in contact over the years. They would always be hanging out. They'd celebrate birthdays together and that sort of thing. Robert had been to Joseph Price's house many times, hadn't stayed over ever. But, he knew him, was comfortable around them. And Robert's wife, Catherine, she knew Joseph, she knew he was going to stay there. Now, at the house that Robert Wone was going to, it wasn't just Joseph Price who lived there. There was a couple other people who lived there too. See, Joseph Price was in a relationship with another guy named Victor Zaborski, who also lived in that home. And there was a third guy there too, Dylan Ward. Now these three, oof. See, Joseph and Victor were in a long-term relationship, but Dylan was also part of it too. It was kind of like one of these like Three's Company sort of ordeals where they were all kind of just kind of doing each other. Well, okay, not really. So Joseph and Victor were in a long-term committed relationship, and Joseph was also in a sexual relationship with Dylan. Victor was not, but Victor knew about it, and this wasn't like a hidden secret sort of thing at all. I don't even know where to begin with this. Dylan and Joseph were into the kinky, they had the masks and the gimpsuit and all that sort of business. And Dylan was the dom, Joseph was the sub. Every hole's a goal. Now, by all accounts, Robert was not involved in this. He was straight as an arrow. He was just friends with Joseph, and he needed a place to crash. By the way, the house, only gorgeous. Back then in 2006, it was worth over $1 million. So God only knows what it's worth in today's nightmare hellscape that we call real estate. 3 stories, kitchen, living room on the first floor, the ground floor. Then on the second floor, a bedroom and an office, which also doubled as a guest room overlooking the street. and then another bedroom on the 3rd floor. There was also a separate basement apartment. That separate basement apartment was rented by a female friend of theirs. So Robert arrived there to that home shortly after 10:30 p.m. that night. He went in, he said, hell yeah, he had a glass of ishka, a glass of water, with Joseph and Dylan in the kitchen. They were chatting about this and that. Victor was also in the house, but he was upstairs already in bed. They kind of chatted briefly. They were like, we'll catch up in the morning. It's getting kind of late. Robert then, he went to have a shower, and he was going to go sleep in Joseph's office, which, as I said, doubled as a guest bedroom and had a pull-out couch bed. That was on the 2nd floor. Dylan Ward, his bedroom was also on that same 2nd floor, but like across the hall from it. Victor and Joseph were then in the bedroom directly above. Now we get into the he said. Joseph and Victor would say that they went to bed, and as they were drifting off to sleep, they heard the door chime. So there wasn't an alarm set in the house, but when you opened the front door, there was like a little bell that just rang. They assumed it was the person who was renting the basement just coming in. Shortly after that security bell chime thing though, they heard 3 grunts. And then they were like, whoa, shit, that's weird. They then were like, okay, they decided then to get up and check what was going on. Going down the stairs, Robert's bedroom would have been right almost at the bottom of the stairs, and they saw the door was open. Robert was in there, he was lying straight up on the bed, flat back on the bed, and he'd been stabbed multiple times. They could tell immediately he was dead. They were stunned and in shock, looking at their friend who they'd only seen moments before. He was fine. And then they saw Dylan come out of his bedroom, which was on the other end of the hall, and Dylan was bleary. What's going on? Now, it's important to note they said they heard the door chime before they heard the grunts. Then they went downstairs and they never heard the door chime again, as in the door chime somebody coming in, but there's no door chime of somebody leaving the house. They also would say they didn't hear footsteps, they didn't see anybody running, they didn't see anything going on here, an intruder. They didn't see or hear anybody. Then Victor Zaborski, he called the police. His words sounded, well, actually, here, you can hear it for yourself.
DC Emergency 911 Operator 6752. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Immediately. We need an ambulance.
What's wrong, ma'am?
We had someone that was in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody.
Okay, somebody's inside the house now?
I don't know. We heard.
Are they bleeding? You see someone bleeding?
Someone is bleeding in our house.
Okay, where's they bleeding from?
I think in the stomach.
In the stomach? Is he cautious? Calm down for me. I'm going to send some help, okay? Female or male?
It's a male. He's a friend of ours. He was spending the night with us.
Okay, and who was the person that stabbed him? Do you know? Is he conscious?
We need an ambulance.
Ma'am, listen to me.
He's not conscious.
He's not conscious at all?
No. We need someone right now.
Is he breathing? Listen to me. Calm down. I'm going to help you, okay? Is he breathing?
I'm upstairs, and he's downstairs. I don't know.
Okay, who's downstairs with him?
My partner is downstairs with him right now. He told me to go upstairs and call the police immediately.
Okay, who's the person that stabbed him?
I don't know. We think it's somebody with an intruder in the house. We heard the chime at the door.
The person that stabbed him, is he still in the home?
I don't know.
Apply pressure to that area. If he was, wherever he was stabbed at on his body, I need you to take a towel downstairs while you're waiting for the paramedics to arrive and just apply pressure.
My partner's holding the
okay,
holding it on him. The person had one of our knives.
The person that stabbed him ran out the door with a knife?
I think so.
That call was placed at 11:49 p.m. and emergency services arrived about 5 minutes later. This is when things get weird. I mean, even weirder than you finding your friend, one of your oldest friends, stabbed to death in your home. When the EMS workers arrived, there was 2 paramedics who arrived to the scene. They came up to the door, were like, what's going on? Where do we go? Who needs help? The paramedics would say that Joseph, Victor, and Dylan were all acting extremely cagey and would barely speak to them. The EMS workers would say that as soon as they set foot inside that house, the hairs on the back of their neck stood up. Something very wrong and very disturbing had just happened here. Joseph Price was the only person in the room where Robert's body was, and he had his back to the paramedics the whole time. He was there at Robert's body. The paramedics come in. He steps away from Robert's body, but still keeps his back to the paramedics. The paramedics were extremely freaked out by this point. Everybody was acting so weird and disturbed. It was like they could still hear the screams echoing around the house. The paramedics were so on edge trying to treat Robert, who it seemed, pretty clearly was gone, but they still had to go through the motions, but they wouldn't take their eyes off the other 3 lads who were there. They kept looking at them, they kept checking their hands, as if they were afraid like Joseph or something might have a knife and might attack the paramedics then. The paramedics would say they were scared. One of them was a 10-year veteran, one of them was a 15-year veteran, and they would say they had never ever been to a scene that was quite like this one. Another thing that freaked the paramedics out was that the 3 men, it seemed like they had just showered. 2 of them were wearing bathrobes and they had wet hair, like slicked back, as if they had just been drying themselves. The first thing the EMS workers noticed was the giant hole, kind of a dead giveaway, in Robert's chest. But no blood. No blood on his body at all. Just a hole. None on the victim, none on the floor, none anywhere else in the room. The room was in fact perfect. No mess, no disarray, no nothing. It was like he'd just been lying on the bed and then somehow holes, 3 of them just appeared in his chest, killing him. Very strange. His wallet, his BlackBerry, still on the nightstand just beside him. Upon closer inspection, it seemed that Robert had been stabbed in the chest 3 times with a hell of a knife. Then he'd been undressed, showered, cleaned, redressed, and placed back in the bed. Robert was also known to grind his teeth when he slept, so he would usually sleep with a night guard in. He still had it in. Still was in his mouth. So 3 stab wounds, no blood coming from any of them. His body was completely clean. It definitely seemed like he'd been cleaned and then left there. The murder weapon was on the nightstand. It was a large knife that had actually come from the home itself. It had come from the kitchen. So you got Robert there, completely undisturbed, except, the 3 holes in his chest. No blood, no nothing coming from him. The room, spotless, ditto the bed, except there was a couple of little droplets of blood that spread out, but from the holes that were in his chest, that's like way too... That's like a nosebleed. There was a towel that had blood in it on the floor, and that was a towel they assumed had been used, as Victor had said on a call. Joseph was putting pressure on Robert's wounds, trying to stop the bleeding, which it doesn't seem he was even bleeding at all. But no, the blood on the towel seemed to have been from somebody wiping the knife. The knife itself had blood the entirety of the way up the blade. Weirdly enough, the wounds on Robert were like 4.5 inches deep. The blood on the knife was up to 5 inches deep. So it seemed like the knife was like too long to have been the ones that actually stabbed Robert. Also on that knife found later were fibers from the towel. So it seemed like that towel had been used to wipe the knife clean. But what was even weirder, and this is where things really stopped making sense, is that so Robert was wearing a t-shirt, had stab wounds that matched the stab wounds in his body. So you could assume he was wearing that t-shirt when he was stabbed, but there was a surprisingly small amount of blood on this t-shirt. There was also no t-shirt fibers found on the knife. It almost seemed like that knife wasn't the murder weapon, it was just made to look like the murder weapon. So before I get deeper into the men who were in that house, their backgrounds and what they say happened, and their police interviews, let me get into what actually happened to Robert Wone, because it is traumatic. So there was 3 stab wounds to his chest. The medical examiner would say they were perfect, as in Robert wasn't fighting the stabber. There wasn't tearing or anything, and each came from the exact same angle. But they all cut serious blood vessels, arteries, and organs. As in, he would have been pumping blood, so the scene was very, very strange. None would have killed him immediately, however, it's believed Robert would have been alive for a considerable amount of time after he had been stabbed. They knew he would have been alive after he had stabbed because blood was found deep in his intestines, as in his heart was still pumping. The stab wound, internal bleeding, his heart was still pumping and his digestive system was still working long enough that the blood could get that far, into his system. But he had no defensive wounds or marks or anything on him like that. And weirdly enough, he had no blood on his hands. It was as if he had been paralyzed before being stabbed. Also found were burst blood vessels in his eyes, as if he had been strangled. But there was no ligature marks at all on his body. So it was maybe somebody held a pillow over his head, something like that. Robert also had multiple needle puncture marks on his body, in his neck, in his chest, on his feet, as if somebody had been injecting him, maybe with something. Now, the medical examiner, when they were making all these findings, they asked, the paramedics. Paramedics said it didn't do it. The doctors at the hospital where Robert would be pronounced dead, they didn't do it. His wife, Catherine Yu, she was asked, has Robert undergone any kind of medical procedures lately? She would say no. No, and needle marks don't last that long, so they must have happened, That night, we can presume, he was screened for various drugs. Nothing was in his system at all. They screened for GHB, which would be something we commonly see that knocks people out, date rape drug. No, wasn't found in his system. Benzos, opiates, meth, nothing. Now, of course, he may have been drugged, but it was either something they didn't test for, or it could have been something that just broke down, so that by the time they were testing for it, it didn't show up. Then they did a sex kit on him. And I'm trying to choose my words very, very carefully here, because this is kind of, like, sensitive. They checked his bits, his outside bits, and his, inside bits. And they found DNA inside his butt. Man-only DNA, if you know what I'm saying. So they were like, okay, this is, clearly he's been, like, sexually assaulted and murdered. But the DNA they found inside him was his own DNA. What the fuck? It was as if he had sexually assaulted himself. Robert had come to this house, been incapacitated somehow, and then been tortured to death. The wounds on him would have been extremely painful. No two ways about it. I mean, just to even think about what he would have been going through in his final moments. Best not, actually. Now, spit take on that, don't. It was scary. It was almost like ritualistic, what had been done to his body. But where had this happened? He had bled a lot, but there was almost no blood in the room where he had been. Only a couple of spots, so that's not that. And then the guys who were there were frankly, the guys were acting scary. Now, I'm going to get into each of them, and I'm not going to shit-talk any of them. Okay, I take that back. I might shit-talk them a little bit. But each of their stories sort of matched. And they also were all pretty interesting fellas. First up was Joseph Price. When the police began speaking with him, Joseph Price was kind of eager to speak for all three of them. Now, I'm going to go through each man's background and police interview, but it's important to note that Joseph Price was an attorney, so it would make sense he would kind of be the one who would want to speak for all of them. He would do the talking and maintain, just as Victor had done on that 911 call, that an intruder, masked man, must have come in and done this to Robert. So then each of them were separated and taken to the police station that night. Now, they weren't, detained or anything. They were all free to leave during these police interviews, but they just decided to stick around and yap away. So Joseph Price was Robert's old friend from college. He was 35 years old at the time, an attorney with Arent Fox, a law firm in DC. He made partner in 2006, the year all of this occurred. Look at you. He specialized in trademark and copyright law and had represented some major clients. He was also very active in gay rights and that sort of thing, advocacy.
Door, fingerprinting that knife. I mean, somebody jumped our fence and went through that door. You said, tell you what I know. We have an alarm system. The alarm was not on, but it has a function where the doors chime if you open the doors, whether the alarm or not. After Robert was there, we had drinks around the sink. Went upstairs, we showed Robert where the shower was, where the bathroom was, right down the hall. Here's your bed. We already made out the pull-out bed for him. We said goodnight. He said he was going to take a shower right then. It was all sticky. I went upstairs, saw the last 5 minutes of the show, and then started watching the first 10 minutes of some other thing on Spike TV. And I knew Victor was getting annoyed that I wasn't turning off the TV, so I turned it off and we went to sleep.
His statement was that they were falling asleep, they heard the door chime, then they heard some grunts, they went down, they found Robert.
So Victor and I both jump out of bed, we run downstairs. There's, the stairs end at the door. I see the doors open, I see Robert is laying there. The bed cover is pulled back. He's laying there. There is blood on him. His hand was out, one arm was out like this and one arm was like this, I think, or somewhere across his body. And there was a knife. I believe it was laying on him, on his stomach or something like that.
He said he found that knife on Robert's chest, picked it up, accidentally getting my own fingerprints on it, then left it on the nightstand, though he would later change that to he pulled the knife out of Robert's body and then left it on the nightstand, which, you'd think you'd remember the difference between just picking it up or...
I picked up the knife, I moved it, I lifted up his shirt, and I could clearly see there was one puncture wound right on his belly. I lifted up his shirt a little more. There was like a lot of blood on his chest.
Then he raised Robert's shirt to look at his wounds, and he saw Dylan come out from his bedroom at the end of the hall. So it's weird though that Joe and Victor, who were upstairs, would come down and find Robert, when Dylan, who was much closer, didn't. Came out last. Apparently heard nothing. Joseph said he got a towel to put pressure on Robert's wounds, which, as I already mentioned, doesn't match the blood on the towel. He would say the front door had been locked, but that maybe the back door had been left unlocked, so this could be how this mystery intruder got in.
Is he homosexual?
No, not gay. Never has been. Didn't think about it. No drugs, no booze, nothing. Robert was like the best, absolutely straight A, no nonsense guy I ever met.
But he didn't.
Joe, however, would say there was not a chance in hell Dylan would hurt anyone, nor Victor.
Like I said, I know Victor and Dylan better than I know my mother. There's no chance on the face of this earth that either one of them could, punch someone, never mind, kill someone. It's ridiculous. And you guys are focusing on us.
No,
This did not happen.
We focusing on the facts.
I know. You guys have to do your jobs.
So all we can look at is what we know, what we see.
So long as someone's dusting the back door and all that kind of stuff, I know you guys will find evidence. There was somebody else in our house.
Hmm.
I know. I heard the chime.
Yeah. You heard the chime. Was that the person leaving?
No, I believe it was the person coming in, because then I hear the
If
grunting
you don't
and
hear
stuff later.
You're not sure how much later.
I know I didn't fall back to sleep.
Well, you heard the chime on the door.
If somebody comes in.
Did you hear a scream or anything like that?
No.
You heard no scream.
I heard the chime, and it was quiet.
That's it.
I don't know how long. Maybe it was a minute, 2, 3, 4. I just woke up. I'm thinking, oh, Sarah came home, and I roll back over.
Your floors, the stairs, they're hardwood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would think that if somebody was going down the stairs, even if somebody was running down the stairs, you better hit that, right?
During the interview, he seemed very concerned with Dylan, asking to see him multiple times, and asking if he had been let out yet, seemingly less concerned with his partner, Victor.
This is one of my oldest friends. What on earth would possess me to do such a thing? Never mind, could I do it? It's crazy.
The whole thing's crazy.
Yeah.
The guy ain't supposed to be staying over at your house tonight. That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense.
But just ask his wife if he was planning to. I can show you the emails right here, probably. I got my BlackBerry. This is from my work account.
Well, maybe he's thinking about doing a little experimentation. I don't know. Why not?
If that were
Why
true,
not?
I would tell you guys.
Why would you?
Because
Why?
Because why not tell you? I mean, my God, I want you to find who did this.
So what I'm asking you is, where'd this guy go?
I believe he ran out of the house.
Between the grunting and you running down the stairs, which happened like...
Yeah.
Wow,
Yes.
that's fast.
I agree with you. Look, it's a crazy. I mean, why wasn't the back door wide open? Why wasn't the gate wide open? Why didn't he go out the front door?
Yeah, but you would think that you would run into this guy, or you would see this guy running.
Yeah, maybe.
Because you said seconds.
I mean, it really was.
Not minutes, seconds.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
you
right.
didn't hear anybody running down the stairs or anything.
Yeah. I do.
So what makes you think it's a burglary if you didn't hear anybody run?
Because he knows in his heart couldn't be Victor and it
yeah.
couldn't be Dylan.
I know it's
Couldn't be
you guys don't know it's from Adam, so who knows? We could all be crazy as loons, but all I can tell you is it wasn't one of them. It wasn't me. We have no reason on earth to do this. I mean, I know Robert's whole family. I mean,
I got 3 homosexuals in a house,
Mhm.
and I got 1 straight guy. What's he doing over there? What is he doing over there? I think we're all drinking wine. You know what's going to happen tonight? You're coming to Jesus tonight. That's what's going on.
that's fascinating and insulting and offensive.
Here we go.
and every
That's
imaginable
why
way.
you're making me say it.
But you know what? That's not what happened.
You
Robert's
know?
happily married. I do know that.
Then why is she
But Dylan's not happily married, is he?
Yeah, he is.
Oh, to you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why you're upstairs with Victor.
Yeah.
And he's downstairs with Robert.
He wasn't
Real,
down.
man.
He wasn't down there with Robert.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, come on. You guys.
You don't know what you're talking about.
I do know.
No, you don't, because you're upstairs and you can't sing.
I
You
can't.
wanna, but you don't know.
That's just not even possible. We didn't do it. I found Robert laying on my couch. It is as bizarre to me as if I found a hippo in my house. It is absolutely unbelievable, and nobody did it.
Victor was Joseph's long-term partner by almost a decade. By the time we get to our story here, he worked in marketing. It was like a marketing manager, consultant, something. Milk, if you can believe that was his game. The Got Milk campaign, that was him. So it's fair to say Victor Zaborski, fairly successful guy.
So what you're basically telling me, and we went over this earlier, is somebody came in your house. What you believe somebody came in your house,
Yes.
through your back door. Well, first of all, over your fence, over your high fence. How high is that? 8 feet? Higher?
Probably 9 foot.
Okay, 9 foot wood fence in the back. In through your back door, took a knife out of your butcher's block off the counter in your kitchen. Went up to the second floor and stabbed Robert and left the knife there, then left without taking anything, without anybody seeing anyone.
That's what I think happened. I think it was probably they were coming in to rob us, and
Why didn't they take anything then if they were coming in to rob you? Why didn't they go to that first bedroom?
I don't know.
Let me ask you this. Did Dylan kill Robert?
No.
How do you know that?
I know Dylan. He's not a violent person. He's one of the nicest, sweetest people I've ever met.
Did you kill him?
No.
You didn't kill him?
No, I did not kill him.
No reason to?
No reason to kill him.
What about Paul?
Joe.
I'm sorry, what about Joseph?
Absolutely not. He was with me.
Yeah, that's quite a mystery we got working here. This is a good one. I mean, 4 guys in the house, 1 guy ends up dead, the other 3, are saying I didn't do it, and the other persons didn't do it. But then we have no evidence of any type of forced entry or anything like that.
His statement to the police was sorta, interesting, in that Victor Zaborski wasn't even supposed to be in the house that night. He had actually been on a business trip, but had come home early from that business trip, and that's why he was there. He didn't even meet Robert that night. He was in bed, probably exhausted from said business trip. Then he was awoken to a low scream or grunts. Pretty much then it follows much the same as Joseph's story. But he would say that as they were going downstairs, they heard another scream, which Joseph didn't mention, and then more grunts. They went down there, found Robert.
That woke me was like a breathy kind of, but it was loud. And so I jumped up. Joe jumped up beside me. We were both sort of, what is that? What is that? We run to the door of our bedroom and opened the door, and we heard another kind of grunt, and flipped the switch on in the hallway, and we both start running down the stairs, and Joe was just in front of me. And then we got to the doorway of the office and saw Robert laying on the bed, and I just freaked out. His eyes were rolled back. He looked very pale.
Didn't hear or see anyone running away or doors slamming. He would say he became pretty hysterical and was ordered by Joseph to go upstairs and call 911, conspicuously leaving Joseph and Dylan, who were in a sadomasochistic relationship, not that there's really anything to do with anything, but you never know, leaving them alone with the body. The police were fairly confident they could break Victor.
Whatever happened between the people in that house. Nobody broke into that house. That didn't happen. We know that for sure. Now, there's one person that's going to be guilty of murder for stabbing Robert. Anybody that tries to cover up for him is going to be just as guilty and charged just as if they stabbed him. You're shaking your head, but I'm telling you that's absolute truth. That's what's going to happen.
A friend of ours died tonight.
A friend of yours was murdered tonight. He didn't die. He didn't just die. He was murdered. Somebody stabbed him with a knife from that kitchen. And you know who that someone was.
I do not.
Yes, you do.
I do not.
Yes, you do.
I do not.
Yes, you do. You certainly do know.
I do not.
You do know. And the further down the road you go with this, the worse it's going to be. Absolutely nobody broke in that house. One of you in that house killed him. Yes, one of you killed him. Maybe you. One of you killed him.
They didn't break him. If there was anything to be broken. And then finally we get to Dylan, who seems kind of like the wild card here. Definitely a different mold than the other two, who were like these big, accomplished businessmen with all the awards and the yada yada yada. Dylan was like completely different. He was the son of a doctor, the oldest of 5 kids from Tacoma, Washington. He had studied foreign policy, while in college, essentially international relations. So he studied foreign policy. Then he went to the Culinary Institute of America, where, you know, if you're going to become a chef, Anthony Bourdain went there. Then he moved to Taiwan, and he wrote children's books, if you can believe that, with stunning titles, such as The House of the Tiger Ant, The Worst Ghost Month Ever, and The Library of Dreams. Then he moved to DC, rented a basement apartment from Joseph and Victor, entered a relationship with Joseph from then, and then the three of them moved into this house. And as I said, his relationship with Joseph was that Dylan was like the dominant one, and Joseph was like his Subway sandwich. Most recently, at this point in time, 2006, he was now working as a massage therapist.
You know, Sergeant Wagner, supervisor here. This is Detective Norris. They're all in the squad working on this matter. It's trouble.
What's that?
Very trouble.
Yes.
I have to be honest and fair with you. I don't believe we'll get the truth here.
Everyone keeps telling me that. I don't know why.
Well, big part. One or more of you three stabbed this guy.
I don't believe that. I really can't believe that. If it's one of the other guys, I will be completely shocked.
Very different life to the others, a bit of a travel bug or whatever, and certainly less stable than the other two.
This guy's perfectly straight, and he's gonna leave his wife for the night and come over to y'all's house.
Because
He's not perfectly straight. That's not something a straight guy would do.
He was working late, he was probably taking the metro, and he didn't want to go all the way back up to
If there's some reason that it happened or whatever like that, and you know, maybe one of the other guys did it and you're in on this.
I'm not in on anything. I was in bed. As far as I know, they were in bed too.
He would say that while he was in the room across the hall from Robert's, he heard Robert go have a shower, then Robert go into his room. He said he heard the latch on Robert's door, so that would lead you to believe Robert's door was locked. Then he said he fell asleep. Next thing he knew, he heard some commotion outside in the hall, and he opened the door, saw the scene. He too was questioned, remained fairly silent. Didn't know what. The police were suspicious of him the most, and they actually polygraphed him, asking did he kill Robert, or did he know who did? He failed both of those questions.
What do you think should happen to, if it is one of your friends, what do you think should happen?
No, there should be a trial. I mean, there has to be an investigation and a trial to figure out what happened.
Okay. I just find it hard to believe that this guy, who never done this before, all of a sudden comes over to your house, sleeps over your house, and the night that he decides to sleep over your house, there's a burglar that comes in there and kills Robbie.
The police then spoke with the next door neighbor, and funnily enough, the next door neighbor was in the room that shared a wall with Robert's room, and they would say that sometime between 11 and 11:30 p.m. they heard a scream coming from Robert's room. Now, the call to 911 wasn't made till 11:50, so the timeline here now is even starting to get... somebody's telling fucking lying son of a bitch here. They did speak with the tenant who lived in the basement apartment. She said she had been out all night, so if that security doorbell chimed, it wasn't her coming in. Now, every entry point to the home was examined. I'm talking the whole kit and caboodle. There was the front entrance, the rear entrance, the rooftop, the one that led to the basement apartment. None had any signs of forced entry whatsoever. nothing was disturbed and nothing was missing. Did I say nothing was missing? I'm the one telling lies, because shit was missing. The police were searching the house, and in Dylan's room, the little hoarder, little squirreler away that he was, they found a cutlery set with big ass knives. Boop, boop, boop. One of the knives was missing. The knife that was missing would more matched the wounds that were made to Robert's body from the length of the blade. As I said, the one that was found in the room seemed too long to have been done to Robert. You know what I mean. So the missing knife, which seemed more likely to be the murder weapon, was not found in the house. In fact, that knife has never been found. They did sweep the house for drugs. The only thing they found, again, in Dirty Dylan over here, they found ecstasy in his bedroom, and Dirty Dylan times two. In Dylan's bedroom, they found, woof model, a shitload of sex toys, and I'm talking like hardcore. I couldn't believe this shit. My innocence is ruined reading about this case. They found shock devices, stun guns, gas masks, all types of things to hold you down, hold you open, gas masks that you could pee into. I'll end it there. The people who meant this shit could probably build a rocket ship that goes to the moon. It's crazy. I don't know how they come up with this shit. They also brought a cadaver dog into the house because, again, the police still had no idea where Robert had been killed. There would have been so much blood from the wounds that were made to him. It didn't seem like it could have happened in the room he was staying in. But there was nowhere else in the house it also could have happened. The cadaver dog led to two spots, though. It smelled to train dead bodies and for blood. It led to the lint trap in the washer-dryer unit they had. It also then led to a drain in their backyard. But they dug up the drain. Nothing. A hose was nearby, though, that looked like it had been used recently, but that must have been a hell of a hose because they could not find anything. Now, get this. They did use luminol searching the house to try and find any blood spots. Now, it wasn't exactly luminol. It was a substance very similar. But, you spray it, you use UV light, and you should be able to detect DNA and blood and that sort of thing. But the police really effed this up the A, let me tell you. The police were using the luminol substance wrong. They used it incorrectly. You were supposed to use this type of one down, like on horizontal surfaces, on flat surfaces, because if you use this spray thing on vertical surfaces, it would drip down and essentially destroy any DNA it would drip down over. They were using it on vertical surfaces, so basically anything that would have lit up was completely destroyed by the use of this blood detection device. So, way to go. Look at you. So all three men were saying the other, couldn't have done it. No, none of us could have done this. I didn't do it, and none of the others could have either. But at the same time, there was no evidence of an intruder. The police examined the home for 3 weeks. Basically everything I just had laid out for you. They were full sure as shit, no shit, that this had been heavily tampered with. They removed all of the drains. They demolished walls. Looked behind them. Found nothing. Weirdly, 3 months later, Michael Price, the brother of Joseph Price, was arrested for breaking into the house to steal shit that night. Steal electronics. Stole a TV and $7,000 worth of electronics. He was arrested for the burglary charges, but those charges were later dropped. Now, Michael Price is a character who only briefly comes up in this story, but he's a pretty interesting guy in his own right. Basically because he would have had a key. He would have had an entry point to the house. This was something Joseph Price never mentioned, that his brother also had a key to that home, so he would have been able to get in without forcing an entry. Also, he was studying to be a phlebologist. That word. At the time, and he had classes in the evenings. He just somehow missed the class the very evening of the murder when he attended every other class. But they would say, he was visiting family. He actually had an alibi that kind of stood up pretty good. In the months that followed, the three men moved to Florida, Miami-Dade County area. And they seem to be trying to put all of this behind them. That was until autumn 2008, when Dylan Ward was charged. The following month, Joseph and Victor were also charged. All three were charged with obstruction of justice, and later charged with conspiracy. So, not murder. Basically, if you look through the affidavit, it doesn't say who murdered Robert Wone, or even that they did, but that they had certainly manipulated the scene, delayed calling the cops, and that they were lying like a rug. The knife they said did it probably didn't do it. It had just been smeared with Robert's blood, while the knife that more than likely did it was from Dylan's room and now was missing. Though they didn't find any drugs in Robert's system doesn't mean there wasn't any. And as there was no defensive marks on Robert Wone's body, it was likely he had been incapacitated somehow. It didn't seem like he'd been restrained, like physically restrained, as there would have been like bruising and stuff like that. So either he'd been incapacitated more than likely with drugs, or perhaps maybe with a stun gun or something like that. And even though they were still saying, Joe, Victor, Dylan, always saying there was an intruder, there must have been, never any evidence that there was an intruder in the home.
The trial begins tomorrow in a high-profile murder case that turned a DuPont Circle townhouse into the center of a mystery. Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward are charged with obstruction of justice, not murder. Investigators believe the three men who lived in the house on Swann Street know who killed their housemate Robert Wone, but they have not told investigators. Wone was stabbed 3 times. The housemates say an intruder killed them.
The trial for the three men began in June 2010, and it lasted a little over a week. It was not a jury trial, it was the judge's decision, and at the end, each man was found not guilty. The judge would say that although she believed they knew who murdered Robert Wone, she could not say that it had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they had tampered with the scene and led to, the obstruction of justice charge. So basically she was saying, you guys know who did it, more than likely one of you did do it, but the charges that you've been charged with, they haven't been proven. I can still find gaps in the prosecution's case. Basically, it's like, come on now. One of the major things that actually convinced the judge that they hadn't tampered with the scene was the knife that was found at the scene. The defense's blood pattern expert was able to say that, oh no, that knife had been used. That it wasn't the secret knife that Dylan had gone missing. That knife they found had more than likely been the one that had been used to kill, so therefore they didn't have more to scene, they didn't hide any other knife or switch another knife out. Basically, the whole depth and length of the knife and depth of the wounds. The defense's blood expert said, oh yeah, that could have been done. The only thing that's missing though is that t-shirt fibers from Robert's t-shirt were still never found on that knife, so it still doesn't conclusively prove that that knife was used. It seems to be like kind of the flimsiest of all the arguments, to be honest with you. It also doesn't explain why one of Dylan's knives was missing. After the men were each found not guilty, they returned to Florida. Joseph Price changed his name to Joseph Anderson. Dylan Ward changed his name to Dylan Thomas. Joseph left his law firm and got a job with an immigrant advocacy group in Miami. Dylan became a Pilates instructor. Victor didn't change his name and continued working for the same marketing company he had before. Dylan would later marry someone else. Joseph and Victor, they would later split up, recently enough that is, and go their separate ways. Shortly after the three men's acquittal, Robert's wife, Catherine, she would file a wrongful death lawsuit against Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward. The civil suit would last a couple of years, and Catherine would say it wasn't about the money. She was hoping that the civil suit for wrongful death would reveal more information about what had actually happened and ideally lead to a criminal case against the men. However, the suit was settled in August 2011 out of court for an undisclosed sum and agreement. So that means that now all three of the former defendants are all living their own separate lives. Now, of course, let's get into what possibly could have happened with the asterisks in Minecraft, of course, and everything I'm about to say now is a complete joke, and I'm not serious about this at all. This is pure speculation, just jokey jokes. Come on. There's really only 2 theories you can talk about, because it's pretty obvious he didn't do it to himself. He was always described as a very happy guy, and it's not like he would, S.A. himself. So that leaves the intruder theory, or more likely the one we're all thinking of, which is that one or more of the men inside the home tortured and then brutally murdered Robert Wone. The intruder theory is sort of interesting. It's sort of interesting in the fact that there's really nothing there. No evidence someone broke in, nothing was stolen. Though the defendants say it was an intruder, they also said they never heard anybody. They never saw anybody. They didn't hear doors slam. They just arrived moments later and, you'd think you'd hear something. Plus, Robert was surely incapacitated in some manner, so if an intruder broke in, Robert probably would have been, oh hey, what are you doing here? And probably likely defended himself in some way. He would have had bruises or marks on him somewhere. Plus, an intruder wouldn't have had the time to do what was done. Plus, an intruder would have had to have walked past Dylan's room to get to Robert's room. No sign of forced entry. The front door was locked, the back door was unlocked, but there was a gate which remained locked that showed no signs of disturbance. It's been theorized that perhaps one of the men unlocked the back door to give the intruder, quote unquote, an entry point, but they forgot to unlock the gate outside. They had, a little fence out back. There was no sign that somebody had, no disturbance out there as in somebody had jumped over the fence. The only thing of note with that is that the next door neighbor who shared a back fence with these lads would say that in their backyard, they had a little sand pit. So it was basically, one of those those soft plastic turtles, and it's in sand, and then you can put a soft plastic turtle shell on top of it to cover it up. And it's for toddlers and infants and that sort of thing. They would say that the next day after the murder, the turtle shell that had been on it, it was like dented in, as in somebody had stood on it to get over the fence into the guy's house. But that never really went anywhere, and the police kind of shrugged that off pretty quickly. Maybe tunnel vision, maybe it could have gone somewhere. We don't know. Regardless, nothing ever came of it, and that could have happened 6 ways from Sunday. And the stab wounds that were done to Robert Wone's body, they seem to have been done with such, I guess the word is care and precision. They were done almost like gently. There was no tearing. They weren't like vicious stabs. They weren't done in anger. It was almost like, okay, if we have to kill somebody as quickly as possible, here is where we will stab them because we want to put them out of their misery. Surgically done. Not like an intruder. If one of, or more than one of the men, possibly did it, and I'm not saying they did do it, but what if one of them did it, I guess it would probably more than likely have been Dylan. Not that I'm saying he did it. He was right across the hall from Robert, and he was also proven into sadism and all that stuff, judging by the shit they found in his bedroom. And also, the possible murder weapon more than likely also came from his room. So perhaps he snuck in and tortured Robert using the various implements that he had. Though then how he would even get in there without Robert fighting back remains a mystery. However, would he, perhaps with the needle marks in Robert's body, drug him with a needle? Perhaps he put something in the glass of water that Robert had when he arrived. Maybe for some reason Robert let him in. Now I've seen some speculation online that Robert was secretly gay or bi, at least, and that maybe, this whole thing had been planned with him staying over. I mean, the police in interviews were like, no way a straight guy would crash in the house with 2 gay guys. What are you talking about? Doesn't seem to be the case at all. Robert's very happily married. Nobody ever said he had any inclination towards being gay or anything like that at all. So I don't think Robert would have, either done something willingly or let somebody inject him willingly. So whatever happened to him must have been done in such a way where he was out of it, paralyzed in some way before he even knew it. Dylan makes the most sense out of the tree. He does something to Robert. He runs back into his room. Joe and Victor come down. Joe sees what's going on, tells Victor to go back upstairs to call the police, because Joe told Victor to go and call the police from the upstairs phone when there was a phone in Robert Wone's room that I also could have just called the police from. But maybe Joe wanted to get Victor out of the area so he could talk to Dylan, because he knew maybe that Dylan had done something. But let's suggest for a second that maybe Robert was secretly gay or bi or something like that. Maybe this was all planned, but went awry somehow. Victor wasn't supposed to be there that night. He just came home early from a business trip. Maybe Joe and Dylan had planned something, either planned to do something to Robert, or Robert knew that this was going to happen. No, way, not this was going to happen, but something was going to happen. Maybe it was some kind of bondage play gone wrong, and Robert was either a willing or unwilling participant. Perhaps the injection marks that were all over Robert's body, they weren't from something being put into Robert. They were from blood being taken out of Robert for some kind of kink or something. The burst blood vessels in his eyes would also suggest something kind of BDSM choking thing. Again, there was no ligature marks, but maybe it was done in such a way where it wouldn't leave marks. Some kind of BDSM play is really the only way that you can explain his own DNA being found inside of him. Nothing else makes sense unless it was his own DNA was forced in. I don't know. This doesn't make sense at all. Perhaps it was something like that, but it all just went too far. See, when you go through all of the theories in this case, none of them really make sense, and you can find flaws with every single one, because this entire case makes no sense, and you can see why it would be controversial. Because whether he was willing or unwilling, at the end of the day, he was wearing his night guard the entire time. Which, if he was into BDSM, I can't imagine night guards are the sexiest thing in the world. So, I don't know. So I don't think it's that. But I can't find any other explanation for this. And now, to bring it to a close, Robert was always described as a great guy, great husband, an advocate for his community, for civil liberties, for all that sort of stuff. Really tragically taken in one of the most traumatic and horrific ways, and in a way that still has no answers. Almost 20 years later, we still don't know what happened to him. It's a tragic story. Nobody wins here. I mean, except a person who should be in prison and is not. Let me know what your thoughts on this case are, and who you think could have done it and what your theories are on what really happened and who really murdered Robert Wone. I mean, you know, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and in this story, we have 3, and none are talking. Thank you so much for watching. It really means the absolute world to me. I hope you found this video as interesting and fascinating as I did research in this case, because it is bananas. But there you go. If you're looking for more That Chapter stuff, please check out the That Chapter podcast, which has a new episode out every single Monday. All podcast exclusive stories are there. Recently we were talking about the Mothman and Kieran Patrick Kelly and all of these other weird serial killers and cases, so and bizarre events. So please give it a go if you're looking for something to listen to, or check out the That Chapter Patreon. $2 a month, you get early access to videos, and there's a whole heap of exclusive videos there too, including some live streams, so check it out. But here, listen, you know, till I see you next week with the next whole video. Some upcoming cases are on, well, some more unsolved mysteries, creepy disappearances, unsolved events, true crime stories, you know the drill. So until then, please take care of each other and yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.